the bigger the ship, the harder it is to make the change. So when you have a large nonprofit that's very well established in its mode of service delivery, it's going to be a little harder for those organizations to make the shift, okay? Now, we've seen some of those happen in some of the programs within those larger organizations. But if you're smaller and more nimble, you're able to make those changes a little bit more easily and a little more readily. But all of the folks right now, 260 across the nation, they're all pretty much early adopters. We'll begin to wade into the waters now where the wins for practice change are going to be a little bit harder. But that is ultimately our metric. We have got to see charity transformed in this nation. And so our metric is, are you changing practice and how are you changing? For example, 5% of all of the organizations that make change are actually changing their funding, moving away from government funding to private funding.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Fromm. The podcast is on the road, and we're recording from the State Policy Network annual meeting, where leaders from across the country come to talk about freedom, limited government, and local solutions. SPN helps groups put those ideas into action. And what's great is we get to meet the people running these organizations, putting those ideas into action. Today, we're talking with someone who's helping charities make a bigger impact in the lives of the people they serve. All across the country, there are charities helping people who've hit hard times or are stuck in the cycle of poverty. In Missouri, a husband and wife team started one of those charities called Watered Garden Ministry. At first, their focus was on serving the homeless, but over time, they noticed something. Some people were becoming dependent. So they decided to change things up. They built a new model that still lends a hand, but also encourages people to invest in themselves. And now they're taking what they've learned and helping other charities and churches do the same by creating programs that reduce dependency and give people real tools to change their lives. I welcome to the podcast James Whitford, who is the president of True Charity. James, welcome.
Thanks, David. Great to be here with you.
Thanks. We're so glad to be here in New Orleans. Kind of different. I know you're from Southwest Missouri. I live up in the Chicago area. It's nice to meet here in New Orleans and enjoy some humid weather.
Right.
And great food.
Right. I'm missing out on the fall season that's starting to sweep into Missouri right now. And here we are staying in the heat in the South.
Yeah. No kidding. Although it's kind of a uniquely, great American city. I'm kind of excited to be here. So.
Yes, it's been great so far. Great conference.
Yep. So you and your wife started Watered Garden Ministry.
We did.
Yeah. And so first of all, where'd the name come from?
Yeah, it comes out of the Bible. So it's interesting when we decided to name our ministry Watered Gardens, we had people that would call and say, do you guys do landscaping or do you sell lawn care equipment? And it's like, no, Watered Gardens comes out of Isaiah chapter 58. So it's out of the Bible. And it's a passage where God is actually chastising his people for going through the motions of religion, but not really investing in the lives of people who are struggling in poverty the way that he wants them to. And he says, if you'll do that, then you'll be like a watered garden and like a spring whose waters never fail. So it's a promise of a flourishing life for us when we help people who are really struggling in need that need the help.
That's great. Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. So, so you started off helping the homeless. It's a great thing. A lot of people think, not enough people probably do that, but so how did that look at first?
Well, it was compassion that ignites your heart to do something. I mean, this is very typical as when nonprofits get started. It's a couple of leaders, they've got compassion, they want to do something, and we wanted to do something. I like to say we had a heart for the poor, but not much of a mind for the poor. And we were helping both folks who were in poverty and folks who were homeless as well, but we were just basically handing stuff out. I mean, people would come in, they'd say, I've got a need. And we'd say, what's your need? And we'd try to help them meet the need. But we were handing things out over and over again and found over time that we were not seeing the outcomes that we had hoped to see in people's lives. And so we began to think about changing our model. How do we get away from handouts that are creating dependency in people's lives? And read a book called Toxic Charity by a guy named Robert Lupton. And the book title kind of gives it away. Charity can be toxic. And In it, he delineates 5 steps to dependency that are really like they were it was like a light bulb went off. You give something to somebody once, they'll appreciate it. If you give the same thing to that person again, they're going to anticipate that it's coming a third time. If you give it a third time, they'll develop an expectation. If you give it a fourth time, they're going to feel entitled to it. And a fifth time, they'll be dependent on you for it. So it doesn't matter whether it's a rent check you're writing 1 month after another or a meal that you're serving again and again and again, but it went from appreciation, anticipation, expectation, entitlement to dependency. So we were actually part of the problem. We were trapping people in dependency and then went about changing our model.
Nice. Well, at one point you felt led to really spend time with the people who you were serving and be homeless in a way. Do you mind sharing that story with us?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, we were very close to people who were struggling in poverty, just running the mission day to day, that type of thing. But I did begin to feel compelled to go and live on the streets. It was a strange feeling. And when I first felt it, I did what most normal people would do, which is just ignore it. And then the second time I felt it, I ignored it again. And the third time I felt very compelled. I was like, I think I'm supposed to go out onto the streets. I don't know for how long. Well, I went and I told my wife. I said to my wife, I said, hey, I think God's telling me I'm supposed to go live on the streets. And she said, oh, I think God will tell me before you go live on the streets, which made sense. I mean, we had kids in the house. But that very night, David, we were reading a book called Crazy Love by Francis Chan. And we opened up to we were reading it together. We opened up to the next chapter, and it was a story about a guy who left his house and went to live on the streets. And I looked over at her and she just knew. And we both were like, whoa. Okay. So the next day I did that. And you'll learn a lot when you do something like that. But one of the most important things that happened to me during that time was interacting with a homeless man who was in his middle age. And we'd known him. His name was Ralph. We knew him. We'd been helping Ralph for a long time. But at this particular time, Ralph and I are both on the streets. I'm sitting on a curb in downtown Joplin, Missouri with Ralph. It's in the evening time, and he's got a brown bag with a sandwich in it that's cut in two. And he takes out a sandwich and he says, James, would you like half of my sandwich? And that's an important thing to put yourself in that situation. A homeless man's offering you half his sandwich. And my first inclination was, well, no, I'm not going to take your sandwich. I mean, I would never do that. I mean, I could go to my home and get food if I needed it. And besides that, you're the ministry and I'm the minister. Now, I didn't say that, but I remember kind of feeling some of those paternalistic tendencies that were not good. And thankfully, David, I was hungry enough that night, having not eaten anything that day, that I broke bread with Ralph on the curb in downtown Joplin that night. And I realized as I did that I had been treating Ralph and thousands of other people as objects of my good intentions rather than subjects who have agency and autonomy and capacity to contribute. On that night, Ralph contributed to something I needed rather than me being the one who's always contributing to him. And that was a game changer. And we began to shift our whole ministry to really seeing every person who was coming through our doors as a potential contributor, people who have ability, not just looking at people for their dysfunction or their disability. We're looking, what's your function, what's your ability? How can you contribute? And realizing that entering into reciprocity with people, even when they're poor, is one of the most dignifying ways that we can be involved in charity work.
So you make that switch to kind of recognizing the dignity in everyone and treating people, like peers in a way.
Yes.
What's that look like practically?
Yeah. Well, practically, for us at our mission, we started what we call a worth shop. We call it a worth shop because we know work awakens worth in people's lives. So even the very basics like food, shelter, and clothing, things that a lot of people would say, oh, just give that one way to that person. We actually began to allow opportunity for people to earn those things. So they can work in one of our social enterprises, crafting goods that go to market or working in our recycling business or what have you, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, what it might be, and they earn a voucher. Then they can spend that voucher. We're restoring agency and choice to people who have now earned their own voucher to spend at our thrift store, or to spend at our shelter for a night of shelter, or to spend at our meal counter for a meal. Rather than giving that stuff away one way, we're entering into reciprocity with people. Now, there are many different ways to do this, but the main thing is, and this is what we're telling leaders across the nation, get away from one-way handouts. Get away from them. There are times when one-way handouts are needed, but they should be rare and they should be very limited in their time of repetition. We've got to move away from relief. I think we went from the Great Depression when relief was needed, and we never got away from relief. And it's taken us into the Great Dependency.
Yeah.
And I think we have a national crisis on our hands. And the only way to fix it is to transform the way that charity is being practiced in the United States. We have to recognize that every person made in the image of God, made in the image of a maker or a producer, is intended to make and produce. And if our charity somehow quenches the drive to contribute what you can for something that you need, we're actually quenching some aspect of human dignity. So entering into reciprocity or exchange with people is incredibly important.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think one of the kind of the core principles of our organization is that everyone has dignity and that everyone has something to offer. There's talents and certainly inherent value in everyone, but so everyone has something to offer, and we can kind of create an environment to call that out and try to use that for personal betterment, but societal betterment as well. So, what are some of the results that you've seen when you've kind of moved to, away from dependency and trying to empower people?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the stories are amazing of people who've been trapped in dependent poverty. And I mean, I think it's important for listeners and viewers to understand there are about 25 million Americans on a trajectory to die in dependent poverty today because we're not doing charity right from the public government standpoint, but also from the private standpoint. We've got to make the change in how we're practicing charity. But the stories are amazing of people who have risen out of poverty because of real opportunity that's being provided. I mean, it is about potential. This is the podcast about potential, and it's recognizing potential in every person. So when folks are coming into your church or your mission or your nonprofit, are you seeing the potential that's there, and how are you acting on that? I could share a story of a young woman named April who was on the streets and addicted and had lost her kids. Her marriage had fallen apart. She was a mess. Came into our mission, came to faith, began to understand her own value through the way that our program works, and that she was built to be a contributor, that she has something worth contributing. That led her into an education that she received, came back, actually worked at the mission, and then started her own women's ministry where she's teaching the same thing to people. So there are story after story of people rising out of poverty, but it takes inspiration and it takes relationship. And we have to enter into reciprocity with people. But one thing, David, we've got to do is get bad charity out of the way. Toxic charity, of which the government is king of, has got to be removed from the work, because it's always easier to go for the handout. When we made our shift at our mission, where we became a more empowering, challenging model, we had thousands of people literally who were no longer coming in our doors. They were dependent on us for handouts, and when we changed our model, they went somewhere else. How are we going to change the somewhere else? That's the work of true charity in our national movement.
I mean, so I imagine there was a number of people just in that story who didn't really like your change. Like they maybe didn't want to engage in bettering themselves in that way.
Sure.
What was that like?
Well, I mean, you think about learned helplessness, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this was a 1967 study done with dogs, but later on, psychologists figured out this is actually something that happens in people. We can learn to be helpless, and I think we've done that to millions of Americans today. They've forgotten that they have ability to create wealth and to provide for themselves. And so we have got to dry up the toxic charity that's creating learned helplessness in Americans today. Part of this is through simple things like work requirements for welfare, of course, right? But the further that we can remove federal government intrusion in the world of charity, the better.
Yep.
And then what we need to do, and what we're doing at True Charity, is equipping nonprofits and churches on the ground to do a better job.
Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. I think, yeah, as long as there's an easy route, I guess, like where people can just have handouts consistently. I mean, there's always a time and place for people who really need something dire, but as long as there's that easy route, it's gonna be hard to change that culture, and I think that's probably what you're out talking about and doing.
You're right. It's human nature. We're going to take the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. And if I can go and get my handout for the day, that's what I'm going to do. So we need to remove the handouts, but we also need to enter into more relational, inspirational charity that's investigational, that actually holds people accountable. I mean, that's the kind of work that we've got to do. Private charity, when it's just drive your car by and I'm going to put food in your trunk and you're going to drive on after that, and I'm going to do that again and again to every car driving by, that is not helpful. Charity where you're handing cash out a window to somebody holding a cardboard sign, that is not helpful. We're going to have to stop the handout charity that's creating dependency in America, and we're going to have to switch to more empowering forms that are investigational and relational. Who are you? Let's talk about your family. Where is your family? Should they be involved right now? Have you been to some local churches in the area? Should we reach out to them? What are you able to do for whatever it is you need today? We've got to enter into those kinds of conversations.
So as you kind of change your model at Watered Gardens, that you decided to start True Charity, your organization that you're spending a lot of your time now going around and talking to people, other charities, other churches. What made you take that step to start True Charity?
Well, it really was realizing that bad charity crowds out good charity. So when you've got thousands of people who are no longer coming through your doors and you know they're going to handouts that are around down the street from some other organizations, you go, wow, we've got to do more than change the culture within the four walls of our ministry. We need to change the culture of a city. But I believe, David, we need to change the culture of a nation in regard to how we view the human person, what poverty really is. It's not just a material issue. And what does effective charity look like? So we launched this educational initiative called True Charity, where I began to do lunch and learns for leaders in my city. Well, we've put all that together now into a national initiative that has 260 churches and nonprofits across 35 states. These are organizations that are leaning into the ideas of privately funded, outcome-driven, work-oriented approaches to fighting poverty. And I believe that privately funded, outcome-driven, work-oriented approaches represents a solution to the problem of dependency in America today. I mean, just imagine if all charity were privately funded, outcome-driven, and work-oriented, we would not see the problems in America that we see today. And so we are creating model action plans and toolkits and training that actually help leaders make the shift. So 62% of the organizations in our network make significant changes in the way they practice charity. They're basically doing what we did at Watered Gardens. We're just simply helping them do it. And I believe as we continue to grow that network throughout the nation, we're going to see some incredibly good things begin to happen.
That's great. How do you guys measure your success?
It basically is how many organizations make the change. So we're not interested in just teaching about effective charity. We don't just want to provide you tools for effective charity and great training. We want to see you make the change. And so we do as much coaching, consulting, implementation help that you need to make sure you shift from your Christmas giveaway program to a Christmas market where parents can actually earn the gift somehow to retain dignity as they give a gift to their child rather than you taking the child through a line where some stranger hands them a gift, right? Or how do we take our food pantry giveaway program to a food co-op where there's cooperative activity from the recipients, where they're actually involved in it? How do you do that? Well, we've created model action plans and toolkits on how to do that and scores of other ways to move toward effective charity. That's what we're doing with organizations across the nation today.
That's fabulous. Are there any types of organizations that you find adopt your model more readily, or ones that are particularly reticent or not interested?
Well, okay, so that's a great question. The bigger the ship, the harder it is to make the change. So when you have a large nonprofit that's very well established and its mode of service delivery, it's going to be a little harder for those organizations to make the shift, okay? Now, we've seen some of those happen in some of the programs within those larger organizations. But if you're smaller and more nimble, you're able to make those changes a little bit more easily and a little more readily. But all of the folks right now, 260 across the nation, they're all pretty much early adopters. We'll begin to wade into the waters now where the wins for practice change are going to be a little bit harder. But that is ultimately our metric. We have got to see charity transformed in this nation. And so our metric is, are you changing practice and how are you changing? For example, 5% of all of the organizations that make change are actually changing their funding, moving away from government funding to private funding. There's a particular percentage that are moving into more of a reciprocity model, an earn it model, kind of like what we do at our mission. So we have others that are doing more goal setting with individuals that they've never done before. There are many who are actually utilizing our outcomes toolkit to measure outcomes. Because right now, David, a lot of funders, and let me speak to the world of philanthropy for a moment, bad charity that crowds out good charity is funded. It's either funded through policy or funded through philanthropy. Yeah. And so we've really got to help donors understand these very same principles, that it's incredibly important to fund organizations that are doing good, empowering work with people, not just giving handouts.
Yeah, you wouldn't think it always, but sometimes being charitable can do damage to folks unintentionally. It really can.
Yeah, it's compassion.
Yeah.
It can be compassion, but compassion, we call compassion a fuel. It's got to go into the right vehicle. You can pour fuel into a vehicle that's an old broken down jalopy. It's not going anywhere. You've got to pour the fuel of compassion into wise, effective charity. That's the good vehicle that's actually going to get us down the road to the change we want to see in cities across America.
It reminds me of my father-in-law has been involved in kind of charitable things, principally in Africa, not only in some other places too, but internationally. And it's different, but he would always talk about and kind of rail against some of the massive organizations that are just giving aid and giving out, companies, organizations we would all recognize. And he's like, they are harming these places. And he would invest in finding kind of social entrepreneurs who are local, or finding partners who would come alongside and really try to empower the people of that country to, in a certain sector, maybe to have something sustainable. And, maybe I always thought of it as almost like private equity charity, like where you're investing in something to try to get something going that's sustainable and going to be profitable for human betterment over time. And it's totally the way to do it.
Absolutely. And plus it's just, it's more dignifying that way too. Dumping aid in developing nations has never lifted a nation out of poverty. It's the same thing with a person. You cannot dump enough aid or welfare on a person that's going to actually lift them out of poverty. It's going to come from within. And the understanding that we're not living in a zero-sum game. We can create wealth. And that people can do that. And we need to provide opportunity. A lot of times you'll hear folks say, we need to do more services in our community, or we need to get our services together, or what are the gaps where we need to fill with extra services? And I'm like, enough service talk. Let's talk about opportunity. Yeah. Let's talk about real opportunity, because services are things you and I are going to provide to someone, but opportunity is something that someone has to take advantage of. And that's where the effort comes from the individual. And it's so important. Truth is, we're talking about a lot of complicated things, but nobody escapes poverty apart from a job.
Yeah.
Now, there are a lot of ways to get into poverty, and poverty is very complex, but you can't get out of poverty without a job. And what that means is there's going to be effort that's required from the recipient of our charity in order to escape poverty. So we should be thinking about work first. How do we help a person move right into being applying effort and being at work doing something? And we really believe that's an incredibly important model for charity today.
That's fabulous. You're truly doing the Lord's work. I know you know that, but I bet you it feels hard sometimes because there's plenty of people who don't want to hear that message, but it's so true.
You're right. A lot of folks who are in the nonprofit poverty fighting space tend to think about social justice and more of a utopian vision for the future, but the practicality, it's failed. I mean, we launched a war on poverty in 1964 that has just miserably failed. Housing first, the idea of just let's put homeless people in a house and we'll solve the problem of homelessness. It has failed miserably. We have got to quit treating the symptoms of poverty. We've got to start treating the source, the underlying pathology of what's going on. And the more we treat symptoms, I think we're actually inflaming things and making it worse. A good analogy for that would be like diabetes is a diagnosis that has a set of symptoms, which might be lethargy and thirst. But I don't want to give the diabetic an ice cold Coca-Cola because that's not going to do them. I mean, it might be good for the thirst and the lethargy, but it's going to do them more harm than good.
Yep.
If poverty is our diagnosis, the symptoms would be no cash, no food, no roof over my head maybe. How are we going to treat those symptoms? Well, I'll give you free housing. I'll sign you up for food stamps. And maybe I'll hand cash out at the corner when you're holding a cardboard sign. We're just treating symptoms. And the more we treat symptoms, the worse the pathology and the underlying issues are getting. We have got to rethink it all. We've got to quit treating symptoms. It's not doing any good. It's incredibly costly.
Yep.
And it's doing nothing but alienating people from real community and healthy family.
It's great. Yeah, really is. I mean, when you just said there's no other way out of poverty than a job, I was like, how did I not already think of that?
Right.
That seems so...
We've lost sight of the simple truth of that, haven't we?
Yeah, it's pretty darn clarifying. Well, hey, you have a book that came out.
I do.
Over this course of the year. I want you to pitch it to our folks.
Okay, great. It's called The Crisis of Dependency. And I think our nation's in a national crisis. And in it, I share a lot of stories out of the mission of where I have seen perverse incentives, especially from the government.
Yeah.
Perverse incentives that are trapping people or holding people back from taking advantage of real opportunity that missions like mine and other missions around the nation are trying to offer people. And as a result, we have a crisis of dependency. Right now, 37 million people in poverty, right? About 70% of them will never escape, according to a Pew Research study. And so you're talking about tens of millions of people who are on a trajectory to die in dependent poverty, and we've got to transform the way we're practicing charity. So the crisis of dependency is an explanation of the problem, but also looking at what are some solutions. How can we actually make some headway into this? And I address policy leaders, philanthropists, and practitioners, because I think all three of those, we've got to come together. The policy, philanthropy, and practitioners have got to come together and really work together to figure this out.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, if people want to find out more about True Charity, hopefully there's people involved in, I'm sure there's thousands of people listening or watching who are involved in philanthropic endeavors themselves, but they'd like to learn more about True Charity. How can they do it?
Well, truecharity.us is the website. So truecharity.us. You could put a slash on that and put workshop if you want to learn how we can bring a workshop to your city. So we go into cities across America, gather leaders together, and talk about some of the things you and I have been talking about with those nonprofit leaders to help ignite some new thought about how they might do charity a different way. And then we're going to welcome them into our network and begin to help them make changes to the way they practice charity. But truecharity.us is a great way to learn more about us.
That's great. I hope people check it out.
Yeah,
again,
thank you, David.
Thanks for really doing the Lord's work.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be with you today.
Thanks for being on, James.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Folks, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.